Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. It would appear that the legacy autos have now shown their hands when it comes to EVs, and we know they will not be capable of many more than 1 million units a year each by 2025, if everything goes according to them, which would be about 3 times quicker than Tesla managed to achieve about the same level. So, depending on whether you think the legacy autos can achieve this target at about 3 times the rate Tesla, well, I was going to say did, but no, Tesla have not managed to achieve this target yet either. But we expect Tesla to be close this year. Either way, 1 million units a year by 2025 is not likely to be close to the numbers that Tesla should be hitting at that stage. I also don't think it's close to what the legacy autos will reach either, despite the billions invested. Okay, so we've ruled out legacy autos as any real threat of competition to Tesla in lots of different facets. But there are a few other potential EV startups like Rivian and Lucid, but they are even further behind some of the legacy autos when it comes to EV production and battery factories. Therefore, we can rule them out anytime soon, which leaves the Chinese EVs, and that is who most of us think are the likely competition. In this regard, I would also expect Korea to eventually come out with some more competitive EVs within time too. Yes, the Chinese are bringing out lots of nice looking EVs, and selling them at reasonable prices too. Every generation of car they produce, their models improve. But anyway, actually, the Chinese EV companies still face the same issues as legacy autos. They need to acquire batteries. NIO doesn't appear to have any plans for their own battery plant. Pretty much everything within that company is outsourced. It has minimal vertical integration. FYI, that doesn't mean they're horizontally integrated either. For NIO to horizontally integrate, that would require them to acquire something like Xpeng motors. The reason we think EVs actually have a chance is they managed to do what legacy auto was not able. They are capable of offering affordable EVs at similar price points to Tesla, at good value for money. As you know, when I talk about the competition, I may come off highly critical, but that's because if the EV does not offer a suitable range at an affordable price, then it's instantly a loser, no matter what else it has. This is something legacy autos struggle with. Oh yes, and to also make a profit on top of that would be another thing legacy autos are also struggling with. Car dealer networks, once seen as a major barrier to entry into the auto industry, is now creating huge diseconomies of scale for them. But these Chinese EVs seem to have cracked that. They're not constrained within the antiquated legacy systems such as car dealer networks. They're able to follow Tesla's business plan closer. With China's lower cost of manufacturing, and with the country incentivizing EVs, China is able to create economies of scale in EV manufacturing. It means that China can actually deliver competitive EVs at Tesla's price points. The largest battery manufacturer, CATL, is also in China. A lot of people like to bring up Xpeng as a potential competitor. Now, they have released a sedan called the P7. Now, I have a feeling that they may have drawn inspiration from Lucid Air. No? Is it just me that thinks they happen to look particularly similar in appearance? On the inside, it actually looks quite tidy. I don't believe I can even see any air vents. It also contains a large widescreen with a minimalist aesthetic. The price starts at around $35,500 after subsidies, compared to the Model 3 in China at $38,700. The Xpeng also has more range, 562 kilometers NEDC, compared to the Model 3 at 468 kilometers. Therefore, on the surface, it would appear that Xpeng have beaten Tesla on range and price. Or at least this is Xpeng competing in low units on their home turf. Yeah, Xpeng only delivered about 6,500 cars in June 2021. Tesla will be at around 100,000 cars a month later this year. It must have been about 7 years or so ago when Tesla was at these Xpeng level of numbers. Therefore, Xpeng is no immediate threat. It takes a long time to scale up, and by the time Xpeng reaches close to maturity, the market is likely saturated. Also, Xpeng use CATL and not their own battery supply, so inevitably they will be constrained by battery supply anyway, and may need to eventually build their own factory to control supply, which would cost them a few critical years. But what the Chinese EVs have shown is that they are much better at manufacturing EVs than the legacy ICE manufacturers, which just goes to show that the legacy auto's intellectual property does not transfer to the EV industry as much as people thought. These Chinese EV startups are doing a better job at making electric cars than the companies that have been making ICE cars for over a century. This video wasn't intended to be a one more reason legacy autos won't survive video, but the subject just keeps popping up. Okay, well, what about NIO? They're much larger. They've delivered over 100,000 cars now. Well, actually, NIO didn't do much better at 8,000 deliveries in June. Li Autos is actually catching up and even beat Xpeng on deliveries by 1,000 in June, with nearly 8,000 units. Remember what Elon said, it's scaling up that is difficult, and we struggle to see any other auto companies at all manufacturing anything close to the number Tesla is at. And it is going to be exponentially more difficult for them to scale from 10,000 units a month to 100,000. And we aren't even seeing anyone break past 10,000 units a month yet anyway. Oh, and as we discussed, NIO also has no plans for their own battery factory, which means they'll be dependent on third-party battery suppliers, which, if you are trying to compete on price to undercut Tesla, is simply not the correct business strategy to have. You need to remove all unnecessary costs to compete with Tesla. Creating battery exchange facilities also adds to price and production compromise too much. NIO and Xpeng haven't scaled to anything significantly at this stage, yet it can be argued that these two companies are possibly, at this stage, Tesla's closest competition. They've offered nice-looking electric vehicles at an affordable price with a practical amount of range for a lot of consumers. But neither of them have their own battery factories, so they are at the mercy of battery suppliers. And if they have to compete so low on price and margins, then they could easily be outbid by other EV competitors on battery supply. Of course, there is the possibility that somehow the Chinese government gets involved and makes sure that CATL will provide sufficient batteries to local EV manufacturers, perhaps. Maybe the companies just want to focus on building EVs for now, and likely don't have the time and resources to concentrate for years on their own battery design. They're probably right too. They need to grow the car company as fast as possible in order to secure some market share. Perhaps they can worry about cutting costs later. But these Chinese auto companies are also likely all turning to CATL for the majority of their battery supply, so they all have to compete over what is available. After CATL have likely sold the lion's share to Tesla, of course, Tesla will consume more batteries than any other company on the planet. CATL is the world's largest battery supplier. Anyway, their growth is out of their control due to battery supply. Even the legacy auto companies saw this as an issue and are investing ahead of time. This will become a serious issue for Chinese EVs, and this is one reason I see them struggling to compete against Tesla. They just won't be able to do the numbers anytime soon. It's the same for legacy autos too, even with all their factories. Hence, legacy autos building the new factories now before it's too late. Well, except there actually is a Chinese EV company that does also make their own batteries. The Warren Buffett-backed BYD. Now, BYD sold 20,000 all-electric passenger vehicles in June. That is a much more sizable number. And the thing that separates BYD from the other Chinese EVs is their vertical integration. BYD make their own batteries. BYD are also particularly known for their commercial vehicles like electric buses. But their cars look so boring. There is nothing inspiring about them. At least the latest Nios and Xpengs look somewhat futuristic. These look so generic. The interiors are not quite so bad, at least not as bad as, say, a Ford F-150 Lightning. But BYD has so many different models, they don't have much economies of scale moving forwards. There is nothing cool or special about these cars. Oh, and they get 250 miles of range, probably NEDC, on an 80 kilowatt hour battery with top speed of 87 miles an hour and 0 to 60 of 8 seconds. Okay, we'll leave BYD there for now. Perhaps come check back again when they have a practical range. But perhaps that's the market. Really cheap electric cars with minimal range and performance. Maybe there is a market if they can undercut Tesla by enough. Perhaps in more developing nations even. Although they will inevitably enter the issue where Tesla launches a Model 2 and no one can compete under that price point. Therefore, at this stage, I'm not too concerned as BYD is a Tesla competitor. but I think they are capable of carving out some of the market share of EVs. It just won't likely come from any of Tesla's customers. Of course, Tesla is simply a better car in every way too, including driving and features. And just because a few of these have beaten Tesla by a few $1,000s on price and range, that doesn't mean people want to buy them over a Tesla. Although I like to point out how important range and value is in an EV, it's more of a barrier to entry. Unless you offer an affordable EV with practical range, it's a loser. Once through that stage, then it's going to come down to driving, safety, features, charging speed, and brand, all of which Tesla currently wins on, hands down. Now that's the Chinese EV's chances as is currently. We also have the possibility of this little tax credit in the US. Well, in a previous video, I have explained that if this tax bill passes or something similar that excludes the Chinese EVs, then it will make it very difficult for the Chinese to compete outside of China. It will actually raise the playing field for legacy autos somewhat. Well, them against the Chinese EVs at least. It also elevates Tesla as well, but there's no avoiding that in any scenario. Future market share of the EV industry is actually fairly easy to calculate. You can just forecast all the battery supply each auto manufacturer will have in the future, and it will be very similar percentage to market share of EVs. Except of course Tesla's vehicles will likely require fewer batteries in every car to get the same range, so their relative share might be a little higher. Anyway, battery factories take a long time to build and get going, and let's not forget Tesla is aiming for 100 gigawatt hours just in-house next year. Oops, this was meant to be an unbiased Tesla video demonstrating how the Chinese actually do have a chance as competition. Well, I don't believe they can compete with Tesla, but there are plenty of ICE cars out there to compete with. Making these videos always makes me so much more bullish. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.